We have Professor Mahmood Amiry-Moghaddam from the University of Oslo. He's also the co-founder and spokesman for the NGO Iran Human Rights, also in Norway, I assume. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much to the organizers, and I must say it's a great honor to be in the same panel as my co-panelists. The relationship between Iran and the West has been dramatically improved after Hassan Rouhani became president. Following the nuclear agreement, several Western leaders have traveled to Iran, and hundreds of European companies are considering investing in the country. Although improvement of human rights was one of Rouhani's main promises during the election campaign, and the reason why many who had considered boycotting the election still voted for him, the human rights situation in Iran has not improved. In many areas, the situation is actually getting worse. It was mentioned Iran's use of the death penalty, which, although Iran has been on top of the world when it comes to the number of the death penalty for many years, but after Rouhani became president, the number of executions have increased by over 40%, an average of 2 to 3 executions every single day. In addition, Iran's fragile civil society has not been under such a harsh pressure for many years, as was mentioned, the example of Narges Mohammadi and women activists in general. It has been claimed that aggravation of human rights is caused by the conservative elements in the Iranian establishment who are trying to prevent Rouhani's reforms. But is it really so that Rouhani actually wants to introduce reforms and improve human rights, but he is prevented from doing so? We have no evidence which indicates that. At least when it comes to the death penalty, neither Rouhani or key members of his cabinet have ever, even once, shown discontent against the high number of executions. On the contrary, the few times Rouhani or Foreign Minister Zarif were confronted by foreign journalists, they defended the practice. Further, the government has not used its legal powers to bring down the number of public punishments where the governor can actually veto. These punishments are widely used inside Iran. It is clear that unlike lifting of the sanctions, human rights are not a priority for the Rouhani administration. Meanwhile, there is a paradox that the human rights violations and use of the death penalty increase at the same time as Iran's diplomatic relations with Western countries are at their best. It doesn't seem that human rights are a priority for the West in its relations with Iran. Western governments are most concerned about the nuclear agreement and the war against ISIS. I've heard Western diplomats say that once sanctions are lifted and the economy improves, the human rights situation will also improve, as if the human rights situation has only gotten worse as a result of the sanctions. Some say that after the deal and removal of the sanctions, President Rouhani will get more power and space to be able to introduce reforms. But is Rouhani's intentions really improving the human rights situation? Hassan Rouhani has never been regarded as a reformist among factions within the Iranian establishment. Even the former president, Mohammad Khatami, who was regarded as a reformist within the system, didn't manage to introduce real reforms despite having the absolute majority of the parliament behind him between year 2000 and 2004. Every time the parliament tried to propose or adopt legislations promoting reforms, they were stopped by the Guardian Council. But not even Khatami was interested in introducing fundamental reforms in the system. He wanted reforms within the frames of the Islamic Republic's constitution. Many journalists regard President Rouhani and between 1997 and 2005 regarded President Khatami as some kind of opposition to the current system. That's not true. There are real conflicts and disagreements within the establishment. There are several wings and factions. But what binds these factions together is much stronger than the disagreement among them. They all believe in a political Islam and different varieties of a theocratic government. They share views on important values, and they want to serve, albeit in different ways and using different approaches within the current establishment. So one cannot expect fundamental reforms by groups within the establishment. The primary objective of Iranian government, parliament, and judiciary is to preserve the establishment around the supreme leader who decides upon the main lines of Iran's policies. If the supreme leader believes it is in the interest of the establishment to improve relations with the United States and the West, then the relations will improve. It was not President Rouhani who decided that there should be direct talks between Iran and the United States to reach a nuclear agreement. The president has no such authority. At best, the president can propose a policy which supreme leader may choose to approve. But in this case, supreme leader had already given the green light for direct talks between Iran and the United States before Rouhani was elected as president. The sanctions were tough, the economic situation was deteriorating, and the discontent among young people was increasing. Now, it wasn't just those who wanted political and social changes who were the threats, but also those who were unhappy because of the bad economy, unemployment, and poverty. So the sanctions were becoming dangerous for the establishment, and therefore they had to be removed. So it was a question of survival of the political establishment. The price was the nuclear deal. Therefore, the secret talks regarding the nuclear deal started between Deputy Secretary of State William Burns and the Iranian counterpart Majid Ravanchi in Oman 3 months before Rouhani was elected as president. But, as it was said, the supreme leader knows that the Islamic Republic and the US cannot be strategic allies. They have competing interests in the Middle East, and in addition, Western values and culture have strong appeal among Iranian youth and are in direct competition with the religious values and therefore considered by the Iranian leaders as threats. In the same way, if or when the supreme leader believes that the drawbacks to the good relations with the West are greater than the benefits, he will change the direction. This was the case under President Mohammad Khatami between 1997 and 2005. A couple of years before Khatami's period was over as a president, one could already see signs of change in Iran's policy. A clear sign was seen at the parliamentary election in 2004, 2 years before, in 2002, 2 years before Khatami's presidency was over. The Guardian Council made sure that many of those who followed Khatami's domestic and foreign policies were not approved as candidates, and thus the so-called conservatives who wanted a confrontation line with the West won the majority in the parliament. So as you can see, the supreme leader has many mechanisms to change the domestic and foreign policy to the way he wants it without much drama. And 2 years later, Ahmadinejad came, and we all know what happened. So this means that the nuclear agreement is valid as long as it has greater advantages than disadvantages for the establishment in Iran. The same applies to the good relations with the West. In other words, the West cannot count on long-term good relations with the Islamic Republic, so the president cannot change the system, and if the system functions and all the organs do their duties the way they should, whoever becomes president won't even have the desire to change the system. Thus, we cannot get a president in Iran who does what Gorbachev did in the Soviet Union, because, as mentioned, the president has no such power. The only way to get a peaceful transition to a system change is if the supreme leader decides to introduce fundamental reforms leading to free elections. Even then, he must have the support from the powerful Revolutionary Guards. There is so much political and economic power involved that this scenario is unthinkable. Therefore, the system continues to fight for its survival due to increasing corruption and internal conflicts. The establishment will increasingly lose support among the social group that constitutes its power base. This means growing demand for repression and use of violence and spreading fear in the society in order to continue holding the power. This is what already is taking place, as the high number of executions and the crackdown on the civil society. This will continue until one day when the system collapses with unpredictable outcome. Depending on how weakened the civil society is, will such a collapse have more or less disastrous consequences. Iran is a multi-ethnic country with 80 million inhabitants, in addition to general repression that affects the entire population. The ethnic and religious minorities, particularly Sunni Muslims, are under extensive suppression. To prevent the growth of extremist groups and to avoid that the eventual system collapse turns into a civil war with sectarian components, it's very important that civil society is strengthened before we get that far. Iran has a relatively large young population, including many women with high level of education, large number of net citizens, and unique civil society with great potential. This is why they use peaceful means in their protests against the authorities. So today, the West has the chance to have a positive influence. Iranian authorities are dependent on Western investment in the country and are therefore bound to have a dialogue with the West. This is a golden opportunity to push for human rights reforms and to allow the growth of the civil society. The political and economic costs for human rights violations and repression of the civil society must be too high for the authorities, so that introducing such reforms and easing repression becomes advantageous. Thus, human rights must be at the top of the agenda in any dialogue with the West and Iranian authorities. Improving the human rights situation must be the condition for Western investments in the country. This is not only the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do. It is only the countries which respect the rights of their own people and where the authorities do not feel threatened by their own youth, which can be counted on as strategic partners and who can guarantee peaceful coexistence in a region like the Middle East. So promotion of human rights and civil society in today's Iran is not idealism, it is realpolitik. So I think I have one more sentence, just can I say that? So you all remember on the 31st of December 1977, President Carter, who was celebrating the New Year's Eve in Tehran with Shah, said, Iran, because of the great leadership of Shah, is an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world. if he knew that just 1 year later, the Islamic Revolution will forever change the geopolitics of Iran and the Middle East, he would have pushed for much faster democratic reforms. Some people might say the same thing about Iran today, which is surrounded by countries like Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, and Iran might seem more stable, but this is the time window which we don't know how long it will last, but where we have the possibility of changing the course of the history in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Amiry-Moghaddam, for the focus on the situation of human rights in Iran and quite a sober account of the Rouhani agenda when it comes to human rights, because there have been a lot of misinterpretations and illusions surrounding actually all of his agendas, including economic policy and domestic politics. So I'm going to just pose a few questions to the panelists before we're going to immediately go over to the Q&A. So let me start, in vice versa. So I'm going to start with the last presentation, actually. Obviously, the situation has not improved in terms of human rights, although there have been a lot of assumptions prior to that actually détente in international relations will contribute to the opening up of space for also Iranian civil society. So why do you think this has not happened? And secondly, who are the main drivers for a human rights or that can effectively push the agenda of human rights inside Iran? Who are the main actors? And perhaps also the other panelists can also respond to that. And how can one effectively aid them in that endeavor? Because as we've seen in the past, the democracy promotion programs have been quite counterproductive, especially when it comes to Iranian civil society. So what can we learn? And is it also not too much of an illusion to think that we can put some conditions upon European or other Western businesses conducting business with the Iranian side, based upon human rights? Because after all, if you look at Western relations towards other countries in the region, they're also not really directed by the concern of human rights.
Right. Thank you. So I hope I remember all your questions. But when it comes to your first question, improved Western relations with Iran or any country doesn't need automatically to lead to improvement in the human rights. The question of human rights must be on the agenda if we want an improvement. It seems that right now it hasn't been on the agenda. We work with the human rights. We have been working with advocacy towards Western countries in more than 10 years. It has never been more difficult to get into the mainstream media, to be present at, let's say, European Parliament in seminars about human rights violations before. It has never been this difficult as it is today, even though the numbers show that it's going the wrong direction. So I think that international community can actually do something if they put conditions. They have done it before. We have done it in South Africa, apartheid. So it is possible to put human rights conditions. Even in Iran, during President Khatami, there was a condition of removing stoning as a punishment. When in 2002, actually, Iranian foreign minister signed a moratorium with the EU. The knowledge wasn't enough that the foreign minister cannot do anything with the stoning issue. But it is possible if it is on the agenda. And when it comes to the actors inside Iran, we have a civil society. Professor Esfandiari mentioned, women, they have been under suppression for so many years, but we see that every time they get organized, every time they come ahead, and Iranian civil society is using peaceful means. So I think that making, as I said, the costs of this suppression high for the authorities. I think this is what they clearly understand, because we should not pretend that, okay, they know that we care about human rights, and we know that they would rather continue the way they are doing. So I think being frank and direct and say that, okay, we can't continue like this. If you want Western investment, you should make real changes in the law. And I think that's the way to go.